Imagine, it's the middle of a sun-bleached Persian summer, somewhere between 500 BCE and the later centuries of the Achaemenid Empire. The air is dry, the wind gritty, and the desert landscape hums with heat. And yet, inside a curious mud-brick dome half buried in the ground, there is ice. Real ice. Not magical, not fictional, just ice. Solid, glimmering, and remarkably out of place. Insulate it with heat-resistant materials and cover it with a thick mud dome shaped to direct hot air away from the center. But let us pause and consider what that actually meant for the people who built and maintained them. Your job might involve descending narrow kanat tunnels by torchlight to clear blockages, crawling under the earth with water trickling past your ankles. The desert air, bitter and biting, would freeze the water overnight. The resulting ice would then be carefully broken and carted into the yakhchāls' underground chamber. The more ice collected, the longer it could last. Or perhaps you were one of the builders shaping the bricks of saruja, special waterproof mortar made from sand, clay, egg whites, goat hair, lime, and ash. It sounds like a recipe for a very disappointing omelet, but it was effective. The material resisted heat and moisture, key ingredients in the slow decay of ancient structures. But within this simplicity lay a cascade of complex decisions. It required patience, precision, constant upkeep. You couldn't build a yakhchāl and forget it. You had to live with it, maintain it, trust it. It was a relationship between people, place, and physics. Each yakhchāl had to be positioned carefully, usually near a kanat, an underground aqueduct that carried cold water from distant mountain sources. Kanats themselves were feats of engineering, dark tunnels that burrowed through rock and desert for miles, sloping gently so gravity did the work. You wouldn't have stumbled upon it by accident. These structures were intentionally built, quietly impressive. They were called yakhchāls, literally ice pits. Ingenious and unassuming, they were a kind of ancient refrigerator that worked without electricity, relying solely on geometry, airflow, and the stubborn determination of human ingenuity to preserve cold in one of the hottest regions on Earth. A quiet defiance of extremes, hidden beneath a layer of dust and silence. To understand the yakhchāl, we need to picture what the Persians were trying to achieve. Ice wasn't just a luxury, it was practical, and in some cases, sacred. It cooled drinking water, preserved food, soothed fevers, and most mysteriously it served social and ceremonial purposes. In Zoroastrian festivals, cold water and snow symbolized purity and order. So this wasn't simply about survival, it was about ritual, culture, and a quiet war against entropy. The basic idea behind the yakhchāl was surprisingly simple. Dig a large, deep pit to trap cold night air. The yakhchāl used a combination of evaporative cooling, passive insulation, and thermal inertia to stay cold throughout the year. Imagine being one of the laborers. At night, during the coldest parts of winter, water would be poured into shallow basins next to the yakhchāl. But here's the remarkable thing. Even in temperatures reaching over 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, the yakhchāl kept its ice, sometimes for months. The design was that efficient. The people maintaining these systems weren't just engineers or builders, they were, in a sense, climate tacticians, playing a game against the sun with tools made of mud, ash, and gravity. And yet, for all its effectiveness, the system was slow. The yakhchāl wasn't only about cooling water. It was about shaping a stable life in an unpredictable land. So why haven't more people heard about them? Why doesn't the word yakhchāl appear in most history books alongside Roman aqueducts or Chinese canals? And what might it say about us that we've largely forgotten how to cool things without machines? Now that you've stepped into the shaded stillness of the yakhchāl's cool interior, it's time to understand the deeper mechanics that made this ancient refrigeration system not just clever, but consistently functional for over 1,000 years. Let's begin with the dome. Not just any dome, mind you, but a precisely engineered paraboloid, shaped to maximize shade and promote airflow. It didn't just store ice, it stored coolness, a concept rarely considered in the modern world, where refrigeration is assumed to be electric and instant. Its structure was thick, sometimes 2 meters or more, made from that strange, resilient mixture called sarouge. And unlike many roofs built to trap heat, the yakhchāl's dome was built to breathe. Cart after cart would be loaded with heavy slabs of ice and hauled into the shaded belly of the yakhchāl, layered between straw or sawdust. The ice remained solid for weeks, even months. And did people actually rely on them? The bogge captured cooler air at higher elevations and funneled it downward through channels, sometimes even directing airflow over water to boost the evaporative cooling process. In winter, when night temperatures dropped below freezing, they became ice farms. The desert's dryness actually helped the freezing process because dry air allows for faster evaporation, which in turn pulls more heat from the water. They were sometimes decorated with brick patterns, geometric motifs, and inscriptions. This wasn't just refrigeration, it was civic pride. This was passive refrigeration, relying on night radiation cooling, a phenomenon where surfaces exposed to the open sky lose heat rapidly, faster, in fact, than they absorb it during the day. In places like Yazd, where a few yakhchāls have been restored, architects and engineers now study these structures, again not for nostalgia, but because their zero-energy design offers lessons for our overheated world. Wealthy households used them to preserve food, but so did merchants, caravanserai hosts, and even local authorities. Ice wasn't just a cool indulgence, it was essential for preserving perishable goods like yogurt, meat, and herbs during long summers or journeys. Others became storage sheds or curiosity pieces, monuments to a time when cleverness was enough, and it was considered a public good, often maintained through WAQF charitable endowments that ensured communal access, even for those with little wealth. Hot air rising from the sun-scorched desert would pass along the outer curve of the dome, where ventilation openings allowed warm air to be pulled away, encouraging cooler air to settle in its place. The dome's geometry encouraged air stratification, where the heavier cold air sank and stayed close to the stored ice, while warmer air continuously cycled out. Others included drainage systems, so the inevitable meltwater didn't stagnate. Every part of the system was self-regulating, from airflow to drainage to temperature moderation, like a stone computer calculating coolness using time and wind as its inputs. Then there's the underground chamber, often more than 5 meters deep, carved or lined with stone, and built below the frost line to insulate it from the scorching summer above. These chambers were sometimes connected to wind catchers called badgers, those tall, tower-like structures often seen in traditional Persian architecture. And remember those shallow basins beside the dome. They weren't just random ponds. It's easy to picture ancient workers rising at dawn to check the basins, tapping the thin sheets of ice with wooden poles, collecting them before the sun returned. And all of this was done without thermometers, electricity, or computers. You might be wondering, how widespread were these? The answer is yes, and absolutely. Throughout the Persian plateau, from Yazd to Kerman, yakhchāls dotted the desert like quiet sentinels of engineering. And for all their boring geometry and passive airflow, these structures weren't treated as mere utilities. Over the centuries, these systems evolved. Some were modified with canals from nearby qanats to circulate cold water through the chamber floor. But what happens to a structure like this when modernization arrives? What do you do with an ice pit in the age of freezers? Many were abandoned, their domes cracked, their pits filled with sand. Still, the knowledge remained. It's strange to think that in our rush to modernize, we've often forgotten the kinds of quiet, enduring solutions that once sustained cities in extreme environments. Which raises the next question: who exactly built and maintained these day in and day out? And how did the yakhchāl fit into daily Persian life beyond just storing ice? You could think of the yakhchāl not just as a building, but almost as a seasonal machine, and its engineers were, in effect, the custodians of winter. Even in the burning months of summer, while the concept of the yakhchāl was elegant, keeping it running required planning, labor, and a sense of communal rhythm. Let's start with the winter ice collectors. Their knowledge was on tea, written down in scientific journals. It was passed from generation to generation by craft guilds and oral tradition, whispered over bricks and beams. You may find yourself imagining the ice harvesters walking outside in starlit darkness. The smell of cold straw in the underground chamber. Not dramatic, not flashy, but undeniably clever. Which leads us gently to wonder, what other ancient inventions have quietly disappeared, not because they failed, but because we forgot how to appreciate their elegance. By the 18th century, what had once been a suspicious and potentially subversive liquid had become ... imperial. Coffee was no longer just tolerated, it was celebrated. It filled the cups of janissaries before drills. It steamed in the hands of poets and court scribes. It rested on silver trays beside visiting ambassadors. In the heart of the Ottoman Empire, a transformation had quietly occurred, might by decree, but by habit. Let's take a step back and notice how deeply entwined coffee had become with Ottoman identity. Start in the kitchen of the Topkapi Palace, where the Sultan's chefs prepared feasts for hundreds of guests. Among the vast staff was a specialized role, the Kavasi Baka chief, coffee maker to the Sultan. His responsibilities were as ceremonial as they were culinary. But this was no simple act. It was a test of grace, poise, even character. Patrons sipped coffee slowly, read aloud from newspapers or manuscripts, played backgammon, and debated everything from religion to recent military campaigns. Could she keep her hands steady? Did she froth the surface just right? And most crucially, Sufi mystics, especially, embraced the drink, saying it helped them stay awake during night-long dhikr sessions. Did she prepare it, sweet, bitter, or just as the guest preferred? Eventually, most schools of thought leaned toward permission, arguing that like wine, coffee did not intoxicate the mind, but rather illuminated it. The preparation of coffee for the ruler was a quiet ritual, a moment of stillness before affairs of state resumed. Then move to the court of etiquette. When the mother of a nobleman visited the family of a potential bride, the young woman would serve coffee herself. It was said that a poorly brewed cup could end a proposal before it began. Further down the social ladder, coffee houses became permanent fixtures in Ottoman cities. Some were open all day. Others had hours as irregular as their customers. You could spend hours in these places without ordering more than one small cuppy, 'cause coffee was not about consumption, it was about presence. Ottoman thinkers even began to write treatises on the benefits of coffee. Some argued it sharpened the mind, cooled the temperament, and fostered spiritual insight. Even the clergy, once skeptical, came around. Something to sip while time passed and history unfolded. In some ways, it strengthened it. Religious scholars debated whether coffee should be considered haram, makruh, or mubah. And while the Ottoman Empire wasn't the only place where coffee culture thrived, it was the place where it matured. The Viennese café, the Parisian salon, even the London coffee house owes a traceable debt to the empire that once banned the brew. In 1555, when the first recorded coffee house opened in Istanbul, it had been an exotic novelty. By the mid-1700s, it was part of daily life from Sarajevo to Damascus. But of centuries of quiet resistance, of whispered debates over tiny cups, and of a sultan who changed his mind. From these coffee houses came music, political ideas, fashion trends, and jokes that circled the empire in endless cups of muddy, fragrant warmth. But perhaps the strangest twist of all is this: the very thing the empire had once feared, that people might talk too freely, organize too icily, or dream too boldly in these coffee houses, was the very thing that gave the Ottoman public sphere its richness. Coffee did not weaken the empire. It gave people something to gather around, something to hold during long conversations, heated games, or quiet moments alone. By the time coffee reached Europe, it was already carrying the fingerprints of countless Ottoman brewers, merchants, and storytellers. And so, as you settle in tonight, perhaps with a cup of something warm and calming. Consider this. What else in history has been banned, feared, suppressed only to become beloved, ordinary, essential? Maybe the next time you drink coffee, you'll think not only of caffeine. You're standing in the middle of an Iranian desert. Sometime in the 5th century BCE, the sun hangs above, like a relentless overseer. There are no clouds, no trees, just the occasional goat and some distant camel tracks. The air shimmers with heat, and yet somewhere nearby a man reaches into a domed mud-brick structure and pulls out a block of ice. Yes, ice in the desert. And no, it's not magic. It's engineering. Persian engineering. Welcome to the story of the yakhchāl, literally, an ice pit. It might sound like a fantasy, but these structures were once a common sight across ancient Persia, which is now mostly modern-day Iran, and they were, in a sense, refrigerators before electricity. Not noisy boxes with coils and hums, but massive, elegant structures that used nothing but wind, geometry, and cleverness to preserve ice year-round, even under the punishing sun. Let's start with the shape. A typical yakhchāl looked a bit like a giant upside-down cone, wide at the base, narrowing as it rose, often up to 10 or even 15 meters tall. This wasn't just for style. The shape had purpose. The dome's height helped create a temperature gradient. Hot air rose to the top of the structure, while the lower sections remained cool. Thick walls, sometimes up to 2 meters thick, were made from a special mix of clay, lime, ash, sand, and goat hair. This mixture, called sarouj, was water-resistant and insulating. Inside, the yakhchāl often had a deep pit dug into the earth, lined with stone or bricks. This is where ice would be stored. The floor might be packed with straw or insulating layers to help preserve the contents longer. But there was more to this system than just storing ice. The Persians needed to make ice first. That required timing, architecture, and patience. Most yakhchāls were used in conjunction with qunats, those brilliant underground aqueducts the Persians invented to transport water from distant mountains. During the coldest winter nights, water from a qunat would be diverted into shallow pools near the yakhchāl. These pools were wide and only a few centimeters deep. Because of the desert's extremely low humidity and clear skies, radiative cooling took place. That means the heat from the water escaped directly into the night sky, and the surface of the water froze. Even if the air temperature didn't fall below freezing, this effect could still produce ice slowly, layer by layer. Each morning, the ice would be carefully broken and carried into the yakhchāl. Over time, the supply built up, layer upon layer, like geological strata. Come summer, this precious ice could be accessed for food preservation, medical uses, or more commonly sherbet. And no, not the powdered, sugary British kind. We're talking about ancient Persian sherbet, a sweet, chilled drink, often made from fruit and rosewater. Imagine that in the middle of July, centuries before electricity, yakhchāls were also community structures. They weren't privately owned refrigerators. Villages often maintained them collectively, like wells or grain stores. There were rules, formal or informal, about how the ice was collected, stored, and used. In some cases, local records even show taxes or guilds associated with yakhchāl upkeep. And what's remarkable is that some of them still stand today. Their thick walls and sturdy design have allowed them to survive earthquakes, invasions, and the occasional goat trying to climb them. If you visit places like Yazd or Kerman, you might still see one looming in the distance, weathered, cracked, but unmistakably there. It's humbling to think that thousands of years ago, communities not only figured out how to survive in arid deserts, but how to thrive with ice. They used passive cooling, careful water management, and sheer patience to build something elegant and essential. But here's a question to ponder. If these ancient engineers could refrigerate ice without electricity, what other modern technologies might not be so modern after all? You're standing in the middle of an Iranian desert. Sometime in the 5th century BCE, the sun hangs above like a relentless overseer. There are no clouds, no trees, just the occasional goat and some distant camel tracks. The air shimmers with heat, and yet somewhere nearby a man reaches into a domed mud brick structure and pulls out a block of ice. Yes, ice in the desert. And no, it's not magic, it's engineering, Persian engineering. Welcome to the story of the yakhchāl, literally, an ice pit. It might sound like a fantasy, but these structures were once a common sight across ancient Persia, which is now mostly modern-day Iran, and they were, in a sense, refrigerators before electricity. Not noisy boxes with coils and hums, but massive, elegant structures that used nothing but wind, geometry, and cleverness to preserve ice year-round, even under the punishing sun. Let's start with the shape. A typical yakhchāl looked a bit like a giant upside-down cone, wide at the base, narrowing as it rose, often up to 10 or even 15 meters tall. This wasn't just for style. The shape had purpose. The dome's height helped create a temperature gradient. Hot air rose to the top of the structure, while the lower sections remained cool. Thick walls, sometimes up to 2 meters thick, were made from a special mix of clay, lime, ash, sand, and goat hair. This mixture, called sarouj, was water-resistant and insulating. Inside, the yakhchāl often had a deep pit dug into the earth, lined with stone or bricks. This is where ice would be stored. The floor might be packed with straw or insulating layers to help preserve the contents longer. But there was more to this system than just storing ice. The Persians needed to make ice first. That required timing, architecture, and patience. Most yakhchāls were used in conjunction with qunats, those brilliant underground aqueducts the Persians invented to transport water from distant mountains. During the coldest winter nights, water from a qunat would be diverted into shallow pools near the yakhchāl. These pools were wide and only a few centimeters deep. Because of the desert's extremely low humidity and clear skies, radiative cooling took place. That means the heat from the water escaped directly into the night sky, and the surface of the water froze. Even if the air temperature didn't fall below freezing, this effect could still produce ice slowly, layer by layer. Each morning, the ice would be carefully broken and carried into the yakhchāl. Over time, the supply built up layer upon layer, like geological strata. Come summer, this precious ice could be accessed for food preservation, medical uses, or more commonly sherbet, and no, not the powdered, sugary British kind. We're talking about ancient Persian sherbet, a sweet, chilled drink, often made from fruit and rosewater. Imagine that in the middle of July, centuries before electricity, yakhchāls were also community structures. They weren't privately owned refrigerators. Villages often maintained them collectively, like wells or grain stores. There were rules, formal or informal, about how the ice was collected, stored, and used. In some cases, local records even show taxes or guilds associated with yakhchāl upkeep. And what's remarkable is that some of them still stand today. Their thick walls and sturdy design have allowed them to survive earthquakes, invasions, and the occasional goat trying to climb them. If you visit places like Yazd or Roman, you might still see one looming in the distance, weathered, cracked, but unmistakably there. It's humbling to think that, thousands of years ago, communities not only figured out how to survive in arid deserts, but how to thrive with ice. They used passive cooling, careful water management, and sheer patience to build something elegant and essential. But here's a question to ponder. If these ancient engineers could refrigerate ice without electricity, what other modern technologies might not be so modern after all? Would you like to continue to section 2 of Story 3? Great, let's continue. Story 3: How Ancient Persians Refrigerated Ice in the Desert. Section 2: Qnuts, sherbets, and the desert's cool secret. Let's go underground for a moment. Beneath your feet, the desert soil grows cooler. Not just cooler than the sun-scorched surface, but genuinely, surprisingly cold. And running through this shaded earth is one of the greatest achievements of ancient engineering, the qanat. To understand how ancient Persians kept their yakhchāls full, you have to understand how they moved water not with buckets or canals, but with sloped tunnels that could stretch for miles across arid terrain. Imagine a gently sloping channel carved into the earth, beginning at the base of a mountain where water collects in aquifers. This tunnel gradually leads down toward the desert plain, using nothing but gravity to transport water. Qnuts are astonishingly simple and astonishingly effective. Each one was built by digging vertical shafts into the ground at regular intervals, allowing workers to remove soil and align the tunnel's slope with remarkable precision. Some qnuts stretched over 70 kilometers. They required maintenance, surveying, coordination, and patience. But once built, they flowed continuously, silently feeding towns, gardens, and these systems date back as far as 700 BC. And they weren't just a Persian invention, they were a Persian export. The technology spread to Egypt, North Africa, and even as far as Spain and parts of China. You can still find remnants of them in those places today. But what's especially fascinating is how qnuts and yakhchāls worked together. As winter temperatures dropped, workers would divert qanat water into long, shallow basins next to the yakhchāl. These basins were often placed north of tall walls called anbars, which shaded the water from sunlight and helped reduce wind that could disrupt the surface's ability to freeze efficiently. Then came the magic of radiative cooling. Each clear night, the water lost its heat not just into the air, but directly into the sky, radiating warmth into space through the dry, cloudless atmosphere. Layer by layer, ice would form on the surface. Workers would break it, collect it, and carefully haul it into the yawning mouth of the yakhchāl. Day by day, the structure filled with ice, sometimes enough to last the entire summer. And what did people do with that ice? Some of it was used for preserving food, especially dairy or meat. But ice had more than just practical value. It had cultural and even spiritual significance. On especially hot days, wealthy households would serve sharbat, a chilled drink made from fruit syrup and ice, often flavored with rosewater or saffron. It wasn't just a beverage, it was a statement. To drink something cold in the middle of the desert was like saying, "We have conquered heat, we have bent nature gently to our needs." During festivals, a yakhchāl might be opened to share ice with the community. A bride might receive a sherbet toast on her wedding day. A patient suffering from heat stroke might be given snow wrapped in cloth to reduce fever. And there was poetry. Persian literature is full of metaphors about ice, its transience, its rarity, its subtle power. Hafez, Sadi, and Rumi all used the language of coolness to describe wisdom, love, and divine beauty. In a desert land, to be cool was not indifferent, it was refined. A person with a calm demeanor, a poet once wrote, was like a breeze from the mouth of the yakhchāls. So now you can imagine a town on the edge of a desert plateau. The roofs are flat, the walls are high and thick to ward off heat. At the center stands a conical dome, ancient but smooth, with a small door set low into its side. Children gather nearby, waiting for a block of ice to be chiseled and passed out. Somewhere, a clay jug of sherbet is being poured, and under it all, the qanat flows, silent, patient. But here's a quiet curiosity to leave you with tonight. In a world obsessed with speed, could a 2,500-year-old system relying on wind, water, and time teach us something about sustainable cooling today? Imagine standing once again before a yakhchāl in ancient times, but today its earthen dome rises from the desert like a quiet sentinel, weathered but unbroken. Maybe there's a small plaque, a few weeds grow around the base. Goats no longer climb on it. The ice pit inside is empty now, its purpose faded, but the air around it remains noticeably cooler. And it's not just your imagination. Even abandoned, these structures still do what they were built to do: deflect heat, channel wind, and preserve cold. A sort of passive resistance against the sun, written in mudbrick and geometry. For centuries, yakhchāls served not just as refrigerators, but as symbols of stewardship. Communities respected them, maintained them, and shared their contents. In an environment where water could mean survival, ice was a luxury, and a shared one at that. So, what happened? Why did these marvels fade from use? The simple answer: electricity. By the 20th century, modern refrigeration became available, first in cities, then in towns, then even in rural villages. With refrigerators and freezers humming away in kitchens, the slow, seasonal rhythm of the yakhchāl seemed quaint, labor-intensive, outdated, and yet, as energy costs rise and climate change becomes harder to ignore, the old ways are being reconsidered. Architects and engineers have begun to look again at these strange conical domes in the desert. Not with nostalgia, but with interest. You see, yakhchāls are not just historical relics. They are examples of passive cooling, a method of temperature control that requires no electricity, no fuel, and no pollution. All it takes is clever design. By studying the airflow patterns, insulation techniques, and water usage behind yakhchāls, modern researchers are developing new building designs that mimic their function. In Iran, India, and even parts of the U.S. Southwest, pilot projects are testing modern yakhchāls, some made of clay, others using modern materials but ancient principles. In Ladakh, for instance, engineers have created ice stupas, cone-shaped ice towers built in winter using gravity-fed water. They melt slowly over spring and summer, providing irrigation in remote Himalayan villages. The shape, you may notice, is not far from a yakhchāl. It's funny how something once forgotten becomes new again. And there's something poetic, maybe even restful about that. The idea that in our hurry to modernize, we left behind solutions that worked quietly, beautifully, and without waste. We abandoned the ice dome for the icebox. But now, in our search for sustainability, The desert whispers. You had the answer already. So tonight, as you drift off, imagine yourself lying in the shade of one of these ancient structures. The sun is blazing, but the breeze from a Bajra Persian wind catcher passes over your face. Somewhere below, ice still lingers. There is no hum of machines, no need for wires or buttons, just clay, wind, patience, and the gentle art of staying cool. Sleep well.